Thank you so much, Aubrey, and for everyone listening with Every Brain Matters. My name is Ann Hassel. I worked in a Massachusetts medical marijuana dispensary for a year and a half. I was one of the biggest marijuana believers on planet Earth. I thought that marijuana was natural, non-harmful, and non-addicting. So I just want to go back in time and say what led me to be a bud tender. I started using marijuana at 16 years old, probably about 3% THC. I thought it helped with my life. It reduced my stress. And I went on to consume marijuana in college. And marijuana was hard to come by and expensive. So I decided to grow my own. And unfortunately, I was arrested. I was actually facing 5 to 25 years for cultivating even a single marijuana plant. And I ended up serving a month in jail. And I have to say, I thought the government had it wrong. I thought that I did not have the problem. And unfortunately, I didn't see how that was harmful in my life. And I actually went on to continue consuming marijuana. I moved out of state and I moved up to Boston. And there I actually got back into growing marijuana. And I did that successfully for several years. So I was actually involved in a illegal marijuana grow. And actually it was in the late 90s. I was using seed bank seeds that were probably 10% THC. I didn't perceive that I was doing anything harmful. I thought I was providing, again, a beneficial plant and that it was a mom and pop type of operation. I did consume marijuana off and on, off when I did things like become a physical therapist, which I did. And however, I always believed in marijuana. I thought, again, it was a plant, it was good for people. So in 2015, when my marijuana corporation was opening in Massachusetts, the third one in the state, I was very excited. People were excited for me, my family and friends. They all knew that this was my destiny. This is what I had hoped for, to be able to, again, pursue what my passion was, which was marijuana. My corporation founders came from Colorado. I thought that they would be providing the utmost medicinal marijuana and it would be grown the best way possible. After all, sick people would be using it. But I went into the industry completely naive and gullible. There were issues that didn't sit right with me. The first opening day, we did not have any CBD, and that's cannabidiol, the non-psychoactive cannabinoid. And that's thought of as being the true therapeutic. So that was not on the menu at all. We had 34% THC face rec strain. And when we asked our CEO, well, where's the CBD? He told us that high potency THC dabs were the high priority for our corporation. There were other problems from the start. I saw the contamination. I was a bud tender weighing and selling bud, and I noticed mold. I was sent to the cultivation center and I trimmed moldy plants. And again, this is something that is dangerous for people, but I was told at the marijuana dispensary and actually at the cultivation center to just cut around the mold or pick around the mold. They did say at the cultivation center that high potency THC concentrate blasting the butane hash oil would take care of the mold. So things were not going well. And when I was told in a morning meeting that we were using out-of-state synthetically derived hemp CBD crystalline, that didn't sit right at all because we were a marijuana corporation supposedly growing the marijuana plant. But as our CEO said, the main priority was the high potency dabs, and they were released about 6 months later. We were told that the high potency THC butane hash oil concentrates were a more medicinal way to medicate. And I knew that our bud was moldy and it was harsh. And I knew that if I could have it in the concentrated form, that it would be better. So we weren't giving any warnings whatsoever. We were just told it's more medicinal. Now, I still remember the day I went over to a coworker's house and I had my dab rig that I had just bought and my shatter, the 98% THC shatter, and it was just an overwhelming high. And I've tried other drugs before, but this was like over the top. And I was really, really, I'd say hooked at that point. Before going in the industry, I thought that marijuana was a calming, helpful plant, but I had noticed people at the dispensary, the coworkers and patients were getting more just angry. There seemed to be dis-ease about the place. People would have threatening and threaten us workers. And also we would have patients have explosive outbursts. My security guard told me, I feel like I'm working in a crack house. And I had to agree with them because it was just getting more and more dark energy and bizarre. Basically, really after the concentrates were released for sale, coworkers and patients started to have health problems, and it seemed like people were just unhappy. And it's interesting that
Mm.
I could see what was happening in other people, but not what was going on with me. And I'm embarrassed to say, or actually ashamed to say, I sold high potency THC dab concentrates to young people, including a 15-year-old. Granted, his mother was there, but we were told just sell whatever to whoever. And there was another 18-year-old who would come in with his grandmother, and he would always buy the sativa wax, the high potency wax. And one time she came in without him, and she told me, well, I need to buy him this because if he doesn't get it, he flies into a rage. And I remember, packaging it up and handing it to her. And she said, I don't feel right about this at all. And I just remember having like a twinge of something in me that felt like there was something wrong. And it's hard for me to look back and consider why, with what I saw, why did I stay there? And I have to say, I was using marijuana. I felt like I could do no other job but be a bud tender. I wanted that employee discount because it enabled me to buy a lot of products, and it wasn't right. And I was as close to tears because this is unethical and dangerous behavior by the corporation, and it's actually well documented in Kevin Sabet's book, Smokescreen. I was just pondering about what was going on and why was this happening, and I just looked at the repeating clip of a young child who was receiving medical marijuana, and it showed him before when he had the seizures, and it showed him afterwards. So I remember thinking, out there somewhere, this is helping someone, and what's happening here isn't right. But hypo time that I had a severe cannabis use disorder. I had all 11 out of 11 symptoms. What would one description of that be? Well, I would be driving around so high, I didn't know if I was in Virginia or if I was in Massachusetts. I would just think, I'll find something, I'll find a landmark, I'll know where I am. And it's really a miracle that that I arrived home safely. My brain was ready to dab. I couldn't unless I was dabbing. And then I started to just really hate myself because I knew to a certain extent that this had a hold over me. But at that point in time, I felt powerless and actually didn't want to change. I would be dabbing in the morning. I'd dab at my friend's house. I'd dab during my work breaks, during lunch, after work. And I didn't just do one dab per session. I'm talking like 3 dabs. So I got to the point where I was doing a half a gram to a full gram a day. I remember one time I was getting ready for work and I was going to dab, and a large chunk of shatter fell on the floor and I couldn't find it. And I was just crawling around desperate on my hands and knees. And I remember thinking, look at you, you are a junkie. Many signs. And at that point, again, I changed. There were physical symptoms and neurological symptoms that I experienced. My coworkers had seizures. I started to have abdominal bloating and nausea, really, really excruciating spasms at night. And I didn't think it was the marijuana. I thought I was just dehydrated. Again, because it's a medicine, I thought that my medicine wouldn't be hurting me. Then I started to experience what I now recognize as cannabis-induced psychosis. I would actually pass out after dabbing on my friend's sofa, and I'd be out for some time and wake up and dab again. Then I started to have these really terrible daydreams of committing violent acts. I thought about vandalizing cars and then harming people in just terrible fashion, like beating them with a baseball bat and stabbing them and then shooting them. And while this is going on in my brain, I just felt so terrible about myself. And I reached the point where I just wanted to kill myself. But I'm very fortunate that I woke up to the harms. Again, I perceived it in other people and not me. And I actually knew I quit the dispensary and I quit marijuana. I threw out my dab rig and I swore off dabbing. But I went through a detox. I actually was at my friend's house, and there I lost 10 to 15 pounds in about a week or two. I was not eating, I was not sleeping, I was having those increased spasms, really bad abdominal pain, and I didn't eat or sleep. And I also didn't feel like I needed to. I was trying to contact the Department of Public Health and describe the contamination. My friend warned me. She's like, Ann, you need to stop because you're going to burn out like a comet. But, my mental state actually went from bad your metabolism, that you can have a substantial release of THC from fat stores. And this is known as THC reintoxication. So imagine that. I've been dabbing daily for 9 months. That was released into my system. So my cannabis-induced psychosis worsened substantially. And I strongly believe that there was an Illuminati conspiracy involving shape-shifting fourth dimension reptilians to manufacture poison marijuana to bring about an apocalypse and establish a new world order. And that is so bizarre for me to say. I did not believe in the Illuminati. I was so believed it. I thought I was the only human on the planet who knew about it. And it was just so bizarre. I was just, again, in a state. For weeks, I was at my friend's house, incapacitated. At that point in time, I had no health insurance and they didn't know what to do anyway. But I just kept reading and researching, and I was really looking at, and I again believed strongly in this conspiracy. The research I was reading was leading me to alchemy, to occultism. And again, it's something when you look back, you wonder, how on earth did I think that? But again, I'm trying to explain that it was such a dark time in my life because, I was terrified. I was terrified that these creatures were going to inhabit a human body and come kill me, and not just kill me, but torture me. And I felt their presence. Again, I thought they were scheming to get me, but I was absolutely terrified. I stopped speaking and my friends were very alarmed. And I started to get a little better once I decided to arm myself. So I actually first I got one knife I had in a pocket, and then I got another knife for the other pocket. And then I got a boot knife, and then I got a pendant knife. And actually I started feeling a little safer once I had those. Someone who never owned a knife and carried a knife, and I had 4 knives on me all the time, sleeping with the knives. Trying to take a shower was hard. I was very hard to do that. I felt like I was at any minute going to be attacked by, again, the fourth dimension shape-shifting reptilian that had inhabited a human. So I eventually got to the point where I got more confident with the knives, and I was able to go outside my friend's house after 2 weeks. And I would sit in the yard and I'd be flipping the knife around. And they actually thought this was an improvement, which just shows you how far gone I was. And then I eventually thought, I need to go do some research. I need to go to the library. And there's a 26-story university library. On the way, I thought my phone was bugged, the car was bugged. Of course, my friend's home was bugged. And when I got to the library, I saw the cameras. And I thought I was being watched, and I could not take the elevators. So I was scrambling up and down 26 stories repeatedly, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I didn't see anyone, but it's scary to think about what would have happened if someone surprised me. Would I have reacted and harmed them? Would it have been another bizarre, violent, inexplicable attack that we hear about in the news? But my friends were very happy to either a complete psychotic break or commit suicide. I was also researching on ways to kidnap my CEO. I wanted to harm him because he wasn't human, and also the Colorado consultant. I was obsessing about them. I was researching them. I thought I had to kill them. I thought I had to save humanity. But the thing that stopped me was that I knew that I would be committing a crime, and I could not end up incarcerated again, because it would just break my mother's heart. So, as the months went by, my health returned, the THC left my body, and I've been diagnosed with heavy metal poisoning, and I did receive treatment. I just tried to forget about it because I had a little of shame about what had happened. And again, I tried to forget. I used to feel very sorry for myself, ashamed about the physical and mental harm I sustained. And for a year, I didn't tell any preventionists about my cannabis-induced psychosis, even after I started communicating with you, Aubrey. But over time, I stopped seeing myself. I took a class with Dr. Paula Gordon about the harms of marijuana. I honestly had no clue about the harms of marijuana because I had been brainwashed by drug culture. I then had the epiphany that THC is dangerous. It's a miracle that I survived So many others didn't, and I feel very grateful. Sometimes I've wondered why, perhaps it's because I was a middle-aged woman with a fully developed frontal lobe. I had marijuana experience. Perhaps that lessened the destruction to my brain, but I know that a critical factor for my survival is that I stopped using marijuana. I want to show a visual about the hold of marijuana on a user. Now, here you have, again, marijuana that's enticing. But what happens is when a user uses marijuana or reaches in and takes a hold of it, well, then they get stuck, they get trapped. But all you have to do is let go of it. And once you let go of it, you're free. I definitely see myself as having once been a THC slave, but I finally let go and I broke the chains of addiction and I was set free. The gift of my sobriety was made possible only by reconnecting to a higher power. And this reconnection was a very long and difficult journey. I was very susceptible to relapses, as all my friends and family, except my mother, told me that I should go back into the marijuana industry. They didn't like my personality change. I was no longer carefree and the happy-go-lucky, basically stoner Ann that they knew for decades. When I quit marijuana, it was a very precarious time. As I said before, I relapsed. I knew that I had to stop, and I knew I had to change my appetite, but I had absolutely no idea how. I decided that to be marijuana-free, I had to be around drug-free people, but I had very few people in my life like this, so I made new friends at my church. It was a really foreign experience for me to do wholesome activities without drugs or alcohol, but I kept with it. And these church people were very accepting and supportive of me. I grew to appreciate their decency, their kindness, and they showed me another way to be. And they liked who I was. So that was very reaffirming, because when you're trying to make a change and people don't like what they see, that can actually stop you from making progress. Marijuana made me weak and afraid. And it's so weak for me to say that marijuana at one point in my time for decades was my everything. I understand the pain of those trying to quit but can't. And sadly, there are those who believe that life is not worth living without marijuana. And this is so sad. When I was using marijuana, I was terrified of public speaking. I was a people pleaser. I was passive, and I didn't want to rock the boat. I could never have spoken up if I had kept using marijuana. I contacted state and federal officials. I've spoke before the FDA. I testified at various state legislators trying to warn people. I did not gain this strength by myself. It was others in this effort. And I give a lot of credit to Julie Shower, who was one of the first people who responded to me when I reached out to her years ago. And she led me to Aubrey and to the Mom Strong, Sally and Lori, and they all helped me. They all inspired me to have the courage to tell my story. And this led to other opportunities. One cannot live without hope. I was once in cannabis use disorder and cannabis-induced psychosis, and it was such a terrible mindset. I was without hope, and it nearly ended my life. I felt after I had quit that I had permanently damaged my brain and that I would never recover. My short-term memory was so diminished, I could not do basic math, and I was completely traumatized by what I went through. I craved to go back to my life crutch, which was marijuana. And actually, I did want marijuana to work for me again. And a few times I did relapse, but I had very bad effects, and I recognized that, and I would regret that. I knew that I had to give marijuana up, and I had to find another way. When I was weak and struggling and trying to quit marijuana, I brought a Serenity prayer ring and had the entire prayer on it, and I wore it to be reminded that I did not want to use marijuana, and that while as I felt incapable of stopping using it, I turned to a higher power that would help me. I had the smallest amount of hope within me that my brain would rewire itself. I prayed for 6 months for my brain to heal so that I could help others. And I have to say, prayer works. Hope in my higher power has been an incredible treasure that I have discovered from this whole horrific experience. With my higher power guiding me, I will never be defeated. This effort has brought about the best of me, and I have been blessed to meet so many others in this effort. Many of you hearing my testimony now. I have been told that by my giving up marijuana and having my brain heal, that I provide hope for users and their families. I am glad to be able to provide that hope. If I, a decades using marijuana user, a Budtender, a dab addict, can do it, then anyone can. I am truly blessed to have finally conquered my marijuana addiction, stopping the marijuana industry from harming me. I was so full of hatred towards the industry, angry at state and federal officials and politicians who did nothing, upset that the media is not covering it. I was distraught and unhealthy, and this was for years. Understanding that gave me great peace. These are the words from St. Augustine. For Almighty God, because he is supremely good, would never allow any evil whatsoever to exist if he were not so all-powerful and good to cause good to emerge from evil itself. There have been many lives tragically lost from marijuana. Andy Zorn, Shane Robinson, Johnny Stack, Aaron Reddy, and also you, Corrine, your beloved daughter, Jennifer. But these lives are not lost in vain. Through our effort, we honor these victims who paid the ultimate price. Legislature, the THC bill that is predicted that the governor will sign. My hope is that this produces a crack in the facade of the commercialized, industrialized marijuana industry, one that goes far beyond Colorado. I'd like to thank you all for listening to my story, and I'm sorry that parts of it were probably hard to hear.
Wow, Ann, I'm really emotional after hearing all that. Thank you so very much. And it just brought such great hope to me. I can speak for me. We will open it up to the group if anybody has any questions or comments for Ann.
And I just want to say I've heard your story, a few times, and there's always something new. And I'm always fascinated, and I'm so grateful to you for being so honest with people.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Ann, thank you so much. That was really vulnerable and beautiful to hear.
Is that I was having relapses and I knew I had to stop. Basically, I remember Aubrey saying that it's playing Russian roulette with your brain. And I got this book. I ordered a book because I was just trying to do it myself on drug addiction. And it talked about examining your life and finding out how you felt on drugs. And then I thought about, why did I turn to drugs? And it was at that age of 16 when I felt very awkward and unhappy and basically unloved and, drugs. So what I did was I actually went through a process where I thought, I'm going to resolve this. I'm going to go talk to this priest because I can't talk with my mother about certain issues, but I'll talk with him. But what he told me, love, and it's important, and that worked for me, was believing in a higher power, because I tried and relapsed repeatedly. Some people can do it without a higher power, but it wasn't the case with me.
A mother this week told me that her son was dabbing. He's, I think, 18 or 19. And she said, not everybody experiences psychosis from dabbing. And I said, oh, I think a lot of people do. And I had read this, I think it was a Mom Strong one about a sheriff, like a 6'3" sheriff who, not a sheriff, he was a police officer, but he was dabbing and he ended up becoming psychotic. And I said, no, I think most people that dab actually end up with some kind of psychosis, maybe not permanently. And I just wondered what you know about that. Like,
I think it's like a trauma to your brain, because look, it's manufactured, it's very harmful, it's very unnatural. You're talking, again, 98% THC. Again, if people were smoking 2% in Woodstock, and that produces actual psychomimetic effects, they know for sure. And I didn't realize this. I did not realize that marijuana caused psychosis. And this has been known since 1967. And I just disregarded it. Now, people will admit marijuana makes you paranoid, right? People know that. That's like an actual very common thing. But there's a very fine line between paranoia and psychosis. I think that like people would have ramped up paranoia that I would see. I dabbed with people, and in front of me, they became psychotic. They became like reduced to the state of a screaming infant, and that's just not
Wow.
normal. I
Right.
know a young man who I met him. I went to my friend's house. He was dabbing a lot, and he killed himself.
Oh,
So
wow.
the people I know, it's very harmful. And I think if you don't think it's harmful, then I think you're in denial.
Yeah, I think they should all be illegal, all these dabbing products. I mean,
I
yeah.
didn't know anything about the concentrate. Let me tell you, I was like, what if I had this awakening and been anti-marijuana if I didn't consume the concentrates? Probably not. Even my friends say, well, come on, Ann. I mean, you were okay with it before. I mean, you were functional. But I'm actually think I have to see the silver lining in this for me, because, being on a drug that is actually injuring your body and brain, it's just such a bad idea. But now, unfortunately, it's normalized even more so. And I feel really bad for these young people, because at least I grew up in the 80s where you knew you shouldn't be consuming marijuana.
Thank you for sharing your story. I've heard it a couple times and I learn more each time. Very inspiring.
I felt the same way, Teresa, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I get the same question. I don't know anybody who's done well on dabs. Like, I don't know
Right.
anybody who's either functioning well
Right.
or doesn't have like extreme behaviors. And I've
Right.
had conversations with wives that their husbands, adult husbands are dabbing, and they're not going to quit, like, and they're becoming abusive and stuff like that. And they asked me, is there any hope? Can he maintain this, this dabbing? And I said, anecdotally, from my personal experience, I haven't seen anybody function on that high potency marijuana. And, Ann just like, solidifies that. And so that, Teresa, that's a really good question to bring up. The same thing with the CHS, the cannabinoid hyperemesis. It's like, if you can get better, but you got to stop. And I think the same, with the dabbing, I don't know anybody who can maintain that type of toxicity in their body. So really good points there. Really good points.
Hey, Anne, maybe could you talk about what the upper level management said to you guys when you had any concerns about the high concentrates?
Well, they didn't. I think the only time we got a warning about the effects of cannabis was when we had our we were going through the patient manual, and we read that maybe 9% of people have a cannabis use disorder. But it was a very awkward time when they mentioned it. People just scoffed at it. We're like, yeah, right. We didn't believe it. They never warned us about the high potency THC. I should have listened to my coworkers. One of them told me, I said, oh, because I was excited about the concentrates. I thought, this is great. This is what the corporation wants. And I was very much into this working in the marijuana industry. And she told me she had a problem with it and that she had to stop using it. And I didn't know what she was talking about. I should have asked more and pursued that. And then another time, I remember when the first day we're selling the concentrates, or soon after, a young man came up to the counter, and I'm like, this is the brave new world of marijuana. And I said, this is like a great clean product. And he said to me, no, I'm not going to use that, because once you start using the concentrates, the dab and the wax, you can't get high from the flower anymore. And that's what people need to talk about. And there's also something else. The only thing I read that my corporation, Colorado consultant, the founder, said, he said that regarding the concentrates, people know their bodies and they can tell when they use it, how to use it. How can that be acceptable? He said that yes, it's stronger, but people's bodies will tell them how to use it. That's completely wrong. And I think, again, he's in it for the money, right?
I have a question. Did any of these executives or these higher level managers, did they use it?
Oh, it's really interesting. Just like the Tilray executive, none of them use the concentrates. Some of them might use the flower, but they don't use the What's that about?
I think that was true with tobacco too.
Really?
I think the higher level executives didn't use it because they knew it was really bad.
Well, that's the thing, is that I didn't know that at the time. All I know was they were from Colorado. They couldn't consume our marijuana in Massachusetts. But the thing is that I read interviews later because I was really after these guys. I mean, I was obsessed with them. I can't. And they just said actually that they could flower, all of them, unless you were my CEO of our corporation. He didn't use marijuana at all. So, hey, that's really even better, right? You can have these toxic, contaminated, addictive, dangerous products on people and not care. And that's across the board. I don't think there are any I'd be surprised if there are marijuana executives dabbing. Now, there was Robert Corey. People might know him as the lawyer. And there's also the gentleman dabber. If you read Kevin's book, he was dabbing. I'm reminded, like, I'm like these people, a little bit older, old school. We get into it and they were like, what's up with this? Oh, we become like addicts of the concentrate. And the gentleman toker was actually not vomiting. He was actually spitting up blood. And in Kevin's book, he realized the harm and he stopped. But guess what? He's back in the industry. And I will never go back in the industry. I think it's such a terrible. I listen to what's happened to your children.
I'd just like to say, Ann, thank you so much. Like everybody else, I learn more about you every time I hear you talk, and appreciate so much your sharing your experience. It's so valuable to others. Thank you.
Yes, I think I got to the brink of cannabis-induced psychosis that people rarely come back from, rarely. And that's the whole thing that's really kind of motivated me. Yes, I knew there was contamination, but once I realized that, and I was in denial about the cannabis-induced psychosis, but it's just so horrific to do that to, like, again, your healthy children who had their whole lives ahead of them. And again, they're thinking this is a medicine. That's the most galling thing about this.
Can I ask a question? This is kind of off of our topic, but you, as having been a budtender, might know the answer to my question. I read an article in the newspaper in Arizona today about how wonderful it is that we now have legal marijuana and all these jobs, and young people who were servers in restaurants and had trouble during a COVID year now have a place to go, and that the tips are so much better as bud tenders than they are serving in restaurants. And that kind of surprised me, and I wondered is that even true? I don't go in a pharmacy and buy medicine and tip the pharmacist. I don't go in a liquor store and buy some liquor and tip the cashier. In a marijuana dispensary, recreational or medical, do they tip the bud tenders?
Well, my corporation didn't allow it, though I know customers wanted to tip us and people wanted to take the tip, right? But we were told we couldn't. Now, I have not gone into a marijuana dispensary since I quit because I just don't want to do that. Perhaps they do because, again, customers wanted to do it. They think they would get better buds. It's like if you tip at the restaurant, you get better service, right? If you tip, you get better buds. But these jobs are low wage jobs. I know I went from earning $45 an hour as a physical therapist down to $15. $15, like, is that supposed like social justice living wage? It's not that much money. The thing is, people who work in the industry, they're users. I'd say every single person who worked at my dispensary used, and we were the heaviest users. And there we are dispensing the product to people and giving them, recommendations. It's kind of crazy to think that you're going to have like a 22-year-old recommend to a woman who has, cancer, and he's recommending the high potency THC. That's what people recommended, what they liked. And it's just so crazy. It's so ridiculous. I know people think that it's medical marijuana, but I can't say it is. After what I experienced, I don't think it's medical at all. And I know that's not PC to say, but that's the truth.
I can tell you're an extremely intelligent person. And I know that, aren't you a physical therapist as well?
Yes, I went back to physical therapy, though it took a long time for me to feel okay in terms of with the computer and the work. Yes.
Well, somebody as intelligent as you are, I mean, I know what it takes to become a physical therapist. It's a grueling, education.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering how if you have any advice how other parents can keep their kids away from this. You know, I mean, here you have everything going for you, and you know, decided to use this powerful drug. I just wondered, do you have any advice that you would say that we could give to parents to help steer their kids away from going down this path? Is that a
You know,
silly question?
no, it's so hard because I wouldn't have listened to anyone. I have to say, my mother was like, "What are you doing?" She always thought marijuana was bad. Obviously, I was incarcerated for marijuana. They wanted no part of marijuana. In my religion, marijuana or drugs are not what you should be doing. You should have temperance and be of sound mind in order to have free will. And what's so hard is that kids don't want to listen to advice, and that's just so hard. And I just think about how I was so hard-headed, and I had to hit a rocky bottom. I didn't survive. And the thing is, I know people want to keep that communication open and maybe not tell their children not to use marijuana, but at this point I think you have to strongly urge them not to, even though, is that going to be effective? I would just say to them, why are you basing your life on a psychoactive substance? Like, what exactly is this? And do they understand? I'd have them look at the concentrates. Are they excited about working and having the high potency THC concentrates? Like, if I'd known that, maybe I wouldn't have gone into it, because that is completely, like, it's bad for you. I know people who I passed out after repeated use, but I know people, I think it was in that, was it in Smokescreen? One woman, or I read about somewhere about a woman who admitted as a budtender. I think it was an article that she passed out after using it.
Yeah.
And again, I think at least your parents who don't support it, because I know someone who said that their mother thought it was a good idea because their child wants to do it, and you want to be supportive as a parent. But I'd have to say, you can't really. I'm glad my mother said don't do it. It didn't stop me, but at least that was something that I had in my mind going into it.
Hmm.
And they all urged me to quit. Everyone, my was coming home after work and crying, and my friend said, "You need to quit this job," but I just couldn't quit, even though it was destroying me.
Did you ever experience CHS at all? Did you
I
ever
don't know
have?
if I did, because I didn't actually have like that vomiting or whatnot. I definitely, was heavy metal poison. That actually is, I did figure out that I was worried about the heavy metal poisoning. Why did I think that? Because I read articles about the pesticides, the nutrients, and I didn't know about any of this until I felt really off. And I just thought, what is wrong with me? And what I feared was heavy metals poisoning, because that can produce cancers. And there are all these people I worked with who, they know what happened to me. They saw my results. And when they go to their healthcare providers, they're told, well, we can't check for that. And they're still using the cannabis concentrates. One is peeing blood. The one who's peeing blood has had cancer. She's a young woman. She stopped doing her cancer treatments because cannabis cures cancer, is what you've heard. I wish I could be more optimistic about how to change the young people's minds, but I would just say it's a low-wage job. It's again a substance that's enslaving people. But I mean, if you're a marijuana user, you don't see that, Corinne. You think it's
Right.
You think it's the salvation of the world. I know that sounds crazy to you all, but you really think that it actually enhances it. It enhances and liberates your brain. And I thought that drugs actually brought me closer, to the cosmic consciousness or God. And that's the exact opposite of what they do. So
Wow.
people who use cannabis, they can get all worked up. They think it's life-saving. They think it's spiritual. They think it's about social justice. They think it can save the planet if we plant it everywhere. With the whole global warming, it's really sad. So when we are saying to them, this is harmful, they don't want to hear that. They perceive that as a threat to their lives. Some of them,
Wow.
yeah, they don't want to hear it.
This is Bilquis. So what can we tell people? What can we tell them that will make them think twice?
I'd say you have a greedy, commercialized, industrialized industry. And I was someone who loved marijuana, and there were other people, again, in the industry, like Robert Corey of Colorado. He had an op-ed, a scathing review of the industry. about the harm. They've taken maybe a plant that could be somewhat benign and maybe have some, actual benefit, and made it into the most disgusting, grotesque, unnatural, destructive product. Why? Because it's the marijuana industry and they want the money, just like how you had Juul come out and they had the high nicotine and harmed everyone. Big marijuana is going to be worse than the big tobacco, for my opinion. And I would say to people, do you support big tobacco? And I think people are educated about it. What we have to do is educate people about how harmful this is. But that's hard to do when you have a powerful industry that is in fact dominating the politics. But warning people about this huge industry, that there are people who worked in it, who believed in it, who saw the reality that it's dangerous and it's heartless. It's heartless to do this to people.
Thank you.
I just have one more question. I'm sorry. I've had these questions on my mind so long, Ann. So do you think if what this drug actually does, because I read in that book, Pot Safari,
Yes.
that if people actually knew, young people actually knew what this did to their bodies and brains, if they were educated enough about this before they tried it, because I know once you try it, you can't be objective about it anymore.
Yeah,
So
you
do
can't.
you think you can't be? So do you think that if they had more information, because we're all about education,
Right.
we want to educate the world about this. So do you think if there was more education that it would make a difference in young people getting involved in this powerful drug?
Absolutely. I think education has to happen. And it's so interesting that you had, was it Peggy Mann who did Pot Safari back in the 70s? What's really changed? The product is, they knew back then, even the low potency was dangerous, right?
Right.
Now
right.
it's even more horrendous. Did all of a sudden it get healthy? No, it's that they stopped. There was a concerted campaign by the marijuana industrialists to get marijuana, as a, use it as a red herring, medical marijuana. That's what Keith Strobel said of normal, and they achieved that. I think the answer is education. Now, I know people say the war on drugs didn't work, but it did in fact bring down marijuana usage. And where is the educational campaign? I don't see it anywhere. And I feel like they don't want it to be, oh, people have their medicine. That's what's so galling about it. Because now they're saying it's a medicine. So you can't say, like, you can't, I guess you're going to have a high workforce because it's their right to consume their medicine. I see this as a huge problem. And I'd like to know, where is the education? That's why the Colorado bill is good, because there is education. There's no prevention in the schools. I actually wanted to be a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. So after what I went through, because I thought I'm one of the rare people. So I went to my local community college with my addiction studies professor, and I had him read my story on Parents Opposed to Pot about the psychosis and whatnot. And I sat there in person with him. I said, look, and I explained the addiction and the psychosis. You know what his reply was? He pointed to his cup of coffee and said, oh, now that's addicting. And it was so bad. Actually, I actually did finish that class, but I found out my community college is getting money from the marijuana industry. They are now offering certification in extraction for the concentrate, edible chef, and Budtender. There was no concern. And also the whole harm reduction, that is actually a bad idea. But then I feel like we're in the minority to say harm reduction is a bad idea, but I think it's a bad idea. It just leads you on to other drugs. You need to stop using anything that's altering your brain. So education, Corey, that would be the best thing. And I just don't see it happening, because in Colorado, look, they haven't put much in education, and they were supposed to do that. And now look at those, you heard those people testify, which I have to say was very inspirational to have those parents come forward. And in my state, give us a few more years, maybe we'll be having the parents come forward and the students come forward. They know what's happening. These kids, we're doing such an injustice to these kids. If you look at the usage, it went down substantially. Also, I know Carla Lowe was involved. They had those marijuana paraphernalia stores. That was everywhere. When you're putting, like in my state, we have billboards. What are they doing? Full page ads in the paper. That's normalizing it. Kids are thinking, like I did, I thought marijuana is legal, it's state regulated, it's safe, and it's far from the reality. The marijuana industry went in there and got absolutely everything they wanted. And at a certain point, I blame them still. I don't understand how they think this is okay. It's not okay.
I appreciate all you're doing.
Well, I'm glad
Me
I could
too.
finally share more of my story, because I have to say, again, I was so ashamed of what I went through. But you know what? The marijuana industry should be ashamed of itself for what they've done. And that's the bad thing. The people who are harmed, the parents of those who have lost their lives from marijuana, the industry and people berate and blame the parents. And that's just so like unfair and cruel. When are they going to assume responsibility for their dangerous products? That's what I want to know. And how many more children will be harmed?
It's just like the opioid industry with Purdue Pharma did the same thing. Blame the people that got addicted to the drug instead of, you know, the documents have come out about how much they knew. They knew everything. They knew everything, knew how addicting it was. Just like I'm sure the industry, the people at the top know how addicting this is. And that's why they're pushing it. That's why they're probably pushing it when you were working there, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting that they said their primary directive was the high potency THC concentrates. And I didn't even know what that was. I remember thinking, well, wow, I don't know. They keep talking about it. I think that might be their way to, again, addict people. And they consume more and more and more, because it's not like you just take one dab and that's it. That's not what people do. You really, like, I started increasing to a lot. And I'm not the only one. I'm just one of the rare people that would say, yes, I had a problem with it. And it was destructive to my brain.